Hello, and welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. I'm your streamer, I'm Matt Lehman, and I'm a software engineer who knows quite a bit about Python and Django, as you might imagine. And I use this stream to work on a side project that I'll talk briefly about, and also just to teach. That's really my goal here, is to show people how to make applications that can live on the web and are more advanced than the toy applications that you might find in tutorials for web frameworks, and just give you some ideas about ways that you can approach starting a business, if that's what your interest is, or just getting more knowledge about how to use Python as a web developer and be more proficient. So that's the general goal. And in all of this, I encourage you to chat, ask questions. But really, a lot of this, like I said, is for learning and for me getting a chance to work on my side project for at least an hour each week. So let's talk a bit about the project and what it is and what it is we're looking at, because we're really building a software as a service. And a software as a service, somebody asked me a couple weeks ago, what is that? And a software as a service is a business that lives online as an application, usually often a paid service that someone creates an account for and provides some value, and either serves a niche demographic or is something broad like Netflix and is channeling most of the internet's web traffic. So the software as a service that we're going to look at here this evening is a service called College Conductor that I have created. It's for independent educational consultants, people who work in college admissions, help students find the right schools as they move on to higher education here in the United States. My wife happens to be one of them, and she was my motivation for getting this project off the ground, to give her a tool that ultimately she can use for her business. So it's really focused on deadlines and all that sort of stuff. None of that is really important for this stream. It's just the context for what we do here, and it gives you an idea of why we're talking about schools and dates and other things of that sort when we're considering the Django models that we interact with as part of the project. But you don't need to become an expert to understand what's going on. In fact, I'd be shocked if you were. I'd be wondering what you're doing here and not guiding other students to get to the right college. So with that, we talked about sharing, talked about asking questions. If you do find this useful, share it out, let others know about it so that we can get more people discussing and having a good time and just teaching people about Python. What are we going to work on tonight? We're going to look at the remainder of a feature that I've been working on for the last few streams. It's an integration with a third-party service, and this service is called Prompt. And Prompt is an essay writing service that would-be college students can use when they are writing their college application essays. The tool is really designed to help those individuals write good, effective essays to help them get into the schools that they desire. And I presume it's a good service. I've not actually used it. I'm not a professional college consultant myself, so I don't really know a lot about it, but I do know that my wife said it was an interesting service to use as a consultant. So really what she was more interested in, though, was this list of schools that they have. So Prompt puts out a list of, here are popular schools in the United States, and here are the application questions that they have. For example, here's Rice University, and it's what are the kind of questions that they'll put on the undergraduate admissions application. So what I'm doing with College Conductor is linking out so that when you go to a school's page, which you would have if you're logged in, like this page, there would be information that says view prompt essays. It's a link that will take you out and take you straight to the page. Previous streams have walked through basically all of that process of creating the Django model to talk to the database and create a new database table, doing the actual display on this school page that we have over here, and then also doing the background task to do a web scrape of that website and make sure that it has the most current list of schools. There are a couple pieces that I still have left on this task that I want to finish off before moving on to the next thing, because I do hope to finish this off and actually be able to move on. I mentioned last week that something that task that I have that's actually doing the web scraping in the background does not currently do is notify me via an email that it's done. So this task runs on a weekly schedule, and it is basically doing a scan of the site and checking if there's any new schools that are added to that page, and if there were, adding it to the College Conductor database. In College Conductor itself, I track schools, and I want to be able to connect what shows up in prompt with what is in College Conductor and connect those so that a page like the University of Virginia page that I showed here would be able to navigate to the proper point in prompt. The problem that I left out as I was doing this process is I didn't send myself an email. I didn't send myself any kind of email. And at the moment in that previous stream, I said that was going to be okay. And I left the stream, and even just like an hour later, I realized, like, well, actually, that's not really okay. I really do want to send even just a basic email to say, hey, Matt, there were changes. You need to go check it out so that you can make sure that your data is as accurate as possible. So that's what we're going to do first, is finish off the task with adding an email, which I've kind of listed out on this issue in GitHub. I use GitHub issues as sort of specifications for the kind of work that I'm doing. And in fact, if you want to read up on the side while I'm talking and coding, I'll drop it in the chat here so that you can know what's going on. And also, I'll drop a note that says, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. All right. So again, if that's you, just ask questions. I'm wanting to teach. I'm wanting to show people what's going on. And if I'm not being clear too, I would love to be able to clarify what might be confusing. Maybe I'm using a terminology that is unfamiliar to you if you're newer to programming, or maybe I use my terminology in a way that you don't for your own software development, and that's a possibility too. So sometimes things happen and words are hard sometimes. So just ask questions, and I'm happy to stop what I'm doing and attempt to answer them. So let's look at the code, shall we? We're working from this vendor tasks file, and the task, ultimately a task. So what is a task? A task is a background task that happens in a tool called Celery. Celery is a background worker that executes on a separate process on my website that does not interact with like normal web traffic. So you can do this either triggered from web requests, or you can do this on periodic schedules like I do, like I'm doing with this one. And so that's what we're looking at when we're looking at this function called scan prompt. It's a task that will get executed once a week. I think I set the schedule for like Sunday at like 3 in the morning or something like that. And the rough guts of this, it turned out to be a pretty short chunk of code. It's only, what is that, like 11, 12 lines, something like that. And really what it's doing is going to that page that was listed that I showed earlier. It's getting the data off that page, passing it into Beautiful Soup, which is a parsing library, and the parser from Beautiful Soup looks for all of the link tags and tries to pull them out. And if it finds any, that's an indication that the data is a school in there, and so it creates a record in the College Conductor database under this prompt school model that is shown in this line, that will connect the name of the school and the slug and the slug is like the unique identifier that will allow me to jump to that specific part of the page. So the very important part that's missing is I want to be able to essentially say, let's just kind of mock it out. So we want to track if anything changed, and really it's going to be not much more than if you made it into this loop, if you're in this loop and you create a prompt school, then I consider changed to be true, because that is a condition of some new school was added, and that's when we want to send our email. So the final thing that we want to check is if changed, then we want to do some code here. That's where we want this code to happen. I've done one of these before in a task that I'm going to go over to actually in a moment and copy from, that's sending a very basic text email, because as a signaling mechanism to me as the back-end person handling this, I'm not making a user interface that has to be pretty. This is not some finely crafted marketing email that goes out to users. This is really just a message that says there's a new school to process to make sure that the data is up to date and robust for your actual users. So what the content of this email is really not very exciting. It's a basic email that will tell me there are new schools from prompt. That's all we care about. So when we actually get to this, it's going to be fairly basic and simple to look at. Okay, so I want to test this in a couple ways, but I think before I do that, I think I need to find the other task that already sends out an email, because when you are working with software as a service, when you're working on a SaaS and working with any chunk of code for that matter, you're going to do some studying on whatever the problem is that you have at the time. And assuming you do your research right, you're going to find patterns that are worth repeating. So it would be silly of me to try and reinvent the wheel and go back to the documentation and reread all that stuff just to send out a simple email that I've already done before. Why not use that past knowledge? So some people will kind of talk about being dry, don't repeat yourself is what that acronym stands for, and that has a place. But there are other times where just using the code patterns that you've already established in the code and copying some of that over is an appropriate way to go. It's not always the right way to go, and if you start to see yourself doing things multiple times, maybe there should be a signal. That should be a signal to refactor, which is to change your code without changing the behavior, to refactor your code to something that could be used commonly. But if it's sort of simple tasks that are unique enough, there's not a whole lot of reason to copy or to start from scratch. So with that said, I want to find the task that does an email. Oh, look, I had brought it up earlier, so that's super convenient. So this is using Django's email message interface, and it appears that the signature for this is about as simple as you could imagine. So you create an email message object, which is a class that Django has, and then you call the send attribute on it. Okay, we can totally do that. We're going to need the actual email message from Django in order to do this, which should be like that. And I'm going to go, we're missing some stuff. Yeah. Okay, so what can we say? So this is the subject line, and the subject line over here was different context. So let's change this to, hey Juan Carlos. Let's change this to prompt or found new prompt schools. So that's going to be the subject, and for now the actual link in it can be something like well, it doesn't really matter. The text can be go check it out. And maybe in the end, I want to link to some kind of admin page that will make it so that right from my email, I can go to my backend processing. That's something certainly to consider, but I'm not even at that point yet. So I missed the settings import. So we need to pull in settings as well. And so now the code for this entire change of sending an email is here, and it's pretty much ready to go. So what do I want to do to finish this off? I want to test it, and I want to prove to myself, since this is just me working on this project, that in the future I will have confidence that it will send out the emails. And that's in case if I ever go back and change this and delete some code, I don't want to accidentally delete an email message. I can't imagine why that would ever happen necessarily, but it's just a good safety net to have a test suite that can guide me to a better place. HTML parser. I'm not exactly sure what you're looking at there, One Colors, but yep, that's what we're working on. So in previous streams, just to get you up to speed, we created this function that does some scraping, from using requests to pull out some data from a website and does some parsing on it. And what we're adding here today is just if there was any stuff that was added and created and put in the database right here, then we want to actually send out a message. That's what I'm doing right now. So we want to go over to the planner test tasks file. And again, this is about repeating good patterns for testing and writing code. So somewhere in here, I checked the mailbox, I think. So we want to say, so essentially when we run this test, the final test that we're going to run, we're going to check that the mailbox, which is the kind of the dumping ground that Django has as a testing environment. So sorry, let me pause there. When I'm in a testing setup, I have my stuff configured so that email will not actually go out. You definitely don't want to send, I don't want to be sending myself emails as the admin whenever I run my test suite. That would be silly. It would be really prone to failure if there was a problem. So that's just not the way to go. Thankfully, Django gives you an ability through the settings. And let's see if we can even pull that up quickly to show it off. Yeah. So there's an email backend that comes with this that you can swap out. It says this is a local memory backend. Okay. And what that does is rather than actually try to send anything via SMTP, which is the mail protocol of the web, it's just going to store it essentially in a list. And we'll be able to look at that list and assess whether the email was sent out or not. Now, one thing I'm not sure about that we might have to do is actually clear out the mailbox between tests. So you can see here in this test, I have mail outbox 0 right here. And so that means that this was just a list, and we took I took the first message that was in there and tested it out. But this is actually the first time that I was testing email in the system at all. So coming over here, where we're going to do a similar thing and test that an email was put there, the mailbox, I'm not actually sure it gets cleared out between tests. And in fact, I have no reason to believe that it would be. So it's very possible that if I run just this one test and check mail outbox 0, that it would pass. But if I ran the entire test suite, it might actually fail. So we might actually have to go in this process and go modify the test case to actually clear out the outbox between each run. Okay, so we care. What do we care about? We care that there is. The first thing I guess we care about is that there is some sort of mail in the mailbox. So we can assert that the length of the mail outbox is 1. That's a reasonable thing to do, and I guess that means we need to bring in the mail module. And the mail module is going to be that interface to the local memory mailbox that I was just speaking about. So right here, let's put Django core mail. And I order these by standard library imports, third-party imports, and then my local imports, in case you're curious of why is it in this order. So if we come back to the test and we check this, it passed. And it passed because I already wrote the code up here. So let's just see it fail. So I'm just making it sure that it fails just by negating it. So that tells me that the core logic, how much time does requests take? Well, I guess it depends on the website that you're reaching out to. So prompt, the page that we're reaching out to for this is this page right here. It's some from prompt, and I can refresh, and it's not super fast, maybe like a second. But this thing that we're running is a task that happens in the background in the morning hours on a Sunday, and it doesn't really affect anybody. So even if it took like 5 minutes, which would be ridiculous, but if it took a lot of time, it still would be okay, because this is just sort of background work. I hope that makes sense. So we have our logic here that we're checking that if any changes happened, that we trigger this email sending, and approved just now by negating this, that we were able to make our test down here fail. So that's good. That means that the changed Boolean that we introduced right here is the right way to go. And so let's see, what else can we do? We could say, what do we care about? That all I really care about is that the that prompt, you know, the name of the tool that we care about is in the subject. So let's say mail outbox 0 subject. And so when I access, because this is the local memory backend and this just is a list of messages, the index 0 is going to be this email message object that appears right here, assuming that the mail thing is cleared out. So I'm using the assert in operator to check that the string is part of the subject, which is the first variable that gets passed in there. Okay, so let's see how we did. I'm going to save it and run the test, and it passes. Okay, now it's time to check my secondary theory to see if when I run the sweep, is one of them going to fail? No. Why? Maybe. Why would that happen? This is one of the things where code can trip you up sometimes. You don't exactly know why. Maybe I already considered this. So let's look at the test case class. No. Maybe perhaps Django already considered this and made it so that in between tests, because ultimately, sorry, I'm jumping around a lot, and I apologize. So I made a test case that derives from the Django test case. The Django test case is, it's got all sorts of extra goodies that come as part of the, like on top of the standard Python unit test case. So I'm adding even more stuff to that that is useful specifically to my application, like factory methods or factory classes to generate data and stuff like that. And I guess all I can really reason is that in this test case class, maybe they do something that clears out the mailbox. That's really sort of surprising me. I sort of expected that this would for sure fail on one of these. Life is full of pleasant surprises, I suppose. So I think that that's really the addition that I wanted to make to this task, which is coming back over to the issue that we're looking at. I wanted to send out an email when there were changes, so that when this thing runs at that night, I can see what happened. So let's call that done. And we were in the test suite already, and we can quickly review the code changes to see the diff, to make sure that what is going to go into version control is what we really care about. So we have our imports, we have the logic of changed, and then we have the changed and then the message that is actually sent out. So that feels good to me. Yeah. I guess to one last little bit of clarity is we can look back at the planner test and see if I tested the sending, which I don't think I did. So I don't really care that. I'm just, I'm confident that I'll call send on it, which is actually the part that does the sending to SMTP under normal conditions. So let's add that to Git. I run some pre-commit hooks that you might have seen there. So Black and Flake 8 are two different tools that are checking the code style and of making sure that everything is formatted in a consistent way. So that's a safety net, again, kind of giving myself as much advantage as I can through the use of tools in order to make it as easy as possible to maintain what can actually end up being a fairly large system. So we're going to say that send out an email when a new prompt school is discovered. And this is for issue number 354. Okay. So that's one thing that I wanted to do this evening. The second part of this is, I don't know where I read this or what video I was watching, but it was talking about how in software, no one knows your feature exists unless you document it. For a library or some software package, that means making good developer documentation. Likewise, for a service, it means telling the people that you care about as your potential customers that this thing exists and is something that's available and useful. And so I want to do as this next part is I want to actually add some mention of prompt over on my landing page. So this is my landing page where visitors will come for the first time and decide whether they even want to start a trial or not. And so I want to find a place on here that will fit, that won't be hopefully too much. I don't want to like belabor that it's there, but I think it's a cool feature to have. And it's one that I think also demonstrates that this application is paying attention to the ecosystem for college admissions people, which is a good selling point, because you're trying to sell when you're developing a SaaS, you're not trying to sell just a set of features, but you're trying to sell benefits. And if I can sell it as the benefit is that they will be able to show their students what admissions essays are out there using prompt. So that's the feature part, but the benefit being like they get the information to their students that they care about. that can be more attractive. So I'm feeling like looking at, I'm trying to keep this page pretty simple, but putting it in an appropriate place feels like it would go here. Like, find what you need. This is information that they would need. So we're going to do a little bit of copywriting here, hopefully not too long. And if I need to tweak it later, we can tweak it later. But I want to get something down so that I can consider this issue basically done. And the landing page itself is nothing very magical. It's really a template. And I think I have it under the index template. And just so we get a full view of this, this is using Django templates. So I'll give a little bit of backstory here, just because it's fun. I started this project out as an API and with a rich client using Ember.js, JavaScript framework. I'm not going to knock Ember. Ember is a nice tool. I did find, for me, though, in the end, it was not the right tool. And I think it was partly because I wasn't using it in the most appropriate way. I was making Ember do everything, including displaying the front end page, as well as like all of the UI, which is what it was good for. But it was not a good fit to have a big JavaScript payload be your landing page. And there's, I think, a bunch of reasons for that. Like if you wanted to do A/B testing, which is a big complicated subject, or you just want to be discoverable on Google spiders, Google crawlers. I have not tried Bulma CSS framework. I'm not actually even familiar with what that is. I'll bring that up in a minute. So JavaScript just didn't work out well for this. So I quickly, at some point, decided I was spending a lot of time making an API, which I was really good at because I know Python very well. And then I was hitting this massive wall every time I came to Ember. It was a lot to learn. I was duplicating a lot of my models over on the client side, and then just these problems with like landing pages and things that probably is not really designed for. I was using it for that. So eventually I made a big simplification step, and I said I'm going to rip out all of Ember and just go all Django server-side rendered stuff. So let's pause. I'm curious, what is Bulma CSS? Now, I hear quite a bit about CSS stuff, and this one's just not on my radar. Flexbox. Okay. Looks pretty cool. The I don't know Bulma. The one that I've been kind of like itching to try is this one. It's Tailwind. So this is not a good page to be looking at. Even this one. Let's see if we can find. Okay, here we go. Here's the tagline for Tailwind. Tailwind is, as they say, a utility first CSS framework. To answer your question, I'm probably butchering your user, Carlos Baco. Okay, something like that. Sorry if I mispronounce things. I'm using Bootstrap here. Bootstrap was just something I knew, and it was pretty easy to get going, and I was looking for speed. I need to know JS, but that's cool. So I stuck with Bootstrap because it was familiar to me. I know that quite a few people a lot of developers are maybe moving away from Bootstrap for reasons. And the one I've been thinking about is, if I was going to move away from something, it would probably be to Tailwind, because I've worked with enough CSS now to know that I really like this utility kind of design of having, you sort of compose elements together using just a bunch of predefined utilities. You actually mess around with CSS very little, and it gives you the ability to make the right spacing, add rounded corners, add drop shadows, all that stuff. So it's very interesting. It's a bit more work to get going, though, because it doesn't, as you learn from like page one of their documentation, it has no components out of the box. So you have to build it all yourself and work up your own design patterns. So if I ever got to a point where I really needed to move away from the look and feel of Bootstrap to something a bit more tailor-made, this is probably where I'd go. But I don't know, maybe I should check out Bulma to see what it's all about. It seems, I mean, it looks pretty nice. A simple grid, flexbox, and sounds like some modern CSS stuff, which is good. Thanks for the suggestion. So getting back to this little bit of copy, we have a template, and we're going to go down to here. So I'm going to start by, I'm just going to copy this whole block just to see what it will look like. You know, obviously it's going to duplicate everything, which I don't really want, but I don't know, I don't remember what's in this lead class, like if it's going to add extra stuff that I don't want, or if it's just going to be the styling that I care about. So let's do this. Let's turn on the virtual environment so that we can start the development server. So I'm using virtual environments because it's a safe way to install Python packages. Tailwinds verbose. Yeah, I agree. Tailwind, you know, that is a criticism that I see of these utility styles, is there end up being a lot of utilities on components. So I don't really have I don't have enough knowledge to say whether that's good or bad in the long run for actually like web performance, that sort of thing. So we start up a virtual environment. I use a tool called Honcho, and I've talked about this in previous streams, but I'll talk about it again because I like it. If you look in my directory of stuff, I have this, let's use, will bat make that prettier? No, and I don't have the right theme set up. Okay, forget that. I have a proc file, which is something you can find in Heroku if you're using a platform as a service, like Heroku is a platform as a service for launching your app. But this proc file basically is a way to say, here are the processes that I want to run to get a local development environment going. So I'm running a Python web server called Gunicorn. I'm running the Celery process to do background task work. And then I have this, I have a make file that is really just a thin wrapper around Webpack to point to the right necessary Webpack stuff, because I didn't want to put it all in one line because it got a little gnarly. So in order to interface with that, rather than use Foreman, which is where proc files sort of originated from, but that's a Ruby tool, there's another one that's a Python tool called Honcho. So we say Honcho start, and it will fire up all of the stuff on the project to get it going, and all of my front end work. And of course, Webpack is super verbose. Thanks, Webpack. There's lots of information, but essentially it funnels all of my logging right into the console here. So you see it in one place, which is nice. So now we can, I'm going to navigate away from the actual production site, because I've definitely gotten confused in the past of why is my change not showing up, only to like 5 minutes later realize that I was looking at the production URL and not localhost. So that's not so great. Just the kind of the battle scars you get from being a developer on the web for a long time. So here we are on my local host now, so we have access to pretty much all the same data. And what is this doing? Okay, so can get rid of that for a minute. All right, so downsides of adding it here is it kind of bloats the bottom. It sort of stretches out this. Webpack for what? I do have some Webpack for some JavaScript. So there's a small, I told you I got rid of Ember, but there's still some stuff that I use JavaScript for. So like particular pages that need, like I have a table that the front end itself is Django templates that are mostly statically served templates that I am doing sort of progressive enhancement with some JavaScript. So for to continue on the example, there's a page where it's a table of information, and my wife who's my product manager for this project, was very adamant that the table have sorting buttons that she can sort and move around and stuff. So that required some JavaScript, and then there have just been little JavaScript bits and bobs that have come up along the way. So I stitch it all together with a Webpack config, because I've done enough Webpack in my past. Okay, so with this copy here, what do we want to do? Well, I'm hoping to maybe like mention this in 2 lines, and maybe that's good enough that even if it bloats some space under here, it won't seem too stretched out. In fact, let's do that. Let's kill everything from like past collision app. Let's see what that looks like on 2 lines. Let's see if that's going to be good enough. Yeah, so that seems sort of reasonable. So if we can work the copy into a couple lines, that would be awesome. So let's see, what can we say? This is about finding what you need. So how about we phrase it as like an imperative? Know your students' essay prompts with our prompt connection. We're gonna do some wordsmithing. So I don't think that's super great, but yeah, I'm not really digging that. This is where some of it's just like the creativity of making SaaS, and it's actually part of what I enjoy about SaaS. It's like if you get into making a product, you really have to. You're not just caring about the code. The code is important, but the truth is the code is like kind of minimally important to the overall picture, and it's really knowing your market. And I gotta confess, I'm not actually doing a fantastic job in that regard, but I do know that it matters because I've worked at enough businesses that are focused on web development to know that the relevance of all this stuff. So you'd really have to try hard at this kind of stuff. And if I actually had volumes of traffic coming to the site, I could A/B test this wording. So I don't want to spend too much time because I don't have volumes of traffic coming in here, but I am not satisfied with what's listed here. First thing we want to do is I want to replace the straight quote with an actual quote mark. I worked at a company that did book publishing, and to have like a straight quote in your body copy is like a big no-no. It's a very obvious like amateur sign. And if you don't know, straight quote is just like what your keyboard, like the thing next to your enter key, you'll have a straight quote and a straight double quote. Versus if you use something like Slack and you're like typing out a sentence with quotes in it, you'll find that Slack will like auto correct. Oh, hey Anthony, thanks man. Thanks for stopping by. So yeah, this copy's not great. What can we say? It's about, I want to sell the benefit. That's the important part. And I want to mention prompt. So know your students' essay prompts. That's the benefit, like that, having that knowledge so they can share it with their students. Maybe I'm just really getting hung up with this word connection, which is kind of crappy. But at the same time, so is this. If I wrote integration, that's totally nerd speak. That's software developer jargon that just doesn't mean things to regular people. So if I was working on a product that was actually for software developers, maybe that would be fine. But I'm not working on a product for software developers. And I think that's interesting, actually. So I listen to a fair amount of like business podcasts, and I listen to developers pontificate on their apps and talk about GitHub and Jira and all this stuff. And what is an interesting problem to me is that most businesses do not, by definition, target software developers. Software developers are a relatively small percentage of the overall population on the planet, which is why we get paid so well. Our skills are so badly desired, and there's not enough of us. But we get a lot of our media that we consume, or at least that I consume, I'll speak for myself, is very focused on solving problems for developers. And so I feel like the terminology that can get thrown around there can be focused on them. But I think you have to, if you're developing for an audience that is not developers, like I am here, educational consultants, you need to speak in terms that resonate with. So what does that mean for this copy? I think what I'll do is I'll probably stick with the word connection, and then I'll run it by my product manager, my wife, and see if she says, oh, that's just awful, that doesn't mean anything to me, or if it actually feels good to her or not, because that's who I really care about. I care about my customer in that way. So yeah, I think maybe then, using that knowledge, let's keep it with that. Okay. So you can see every time I was refreshing and stuff, there were things running in the background, and you can see I was doing a get, and so all of those logs get dumped into Honcho as well. So Honcho is really cool, coming back to that as we're finishing up this feature. So that's not much to go with to add this, but I think that's good enough. So let's say add some copy to highlight prompt on the landing page. And with that, I'm going to use the fixes word to close out 354. So if you don't know this is a cool little trick that Git has. If you're working on a project and you use GitHub issues, you can use the word fix or fixes, or there's a bunch of other kind of synonyms for that. That if you put that in your commit message, and I don't think it has to be even capitalized or anything, but the only important part is you do have to say hash sign issue number. It will actually take the action of closing that. And in fact, just so we can see it, let's do that. So I'm going to check this, and I committed it, and let's push it to GitHub. Let's see that. Yeah, cool. So this message, just by having fixes, whoops, or there, hits in this one, just by having fixes in this, close the issue, which is great. Okay, so what should we do now? I had some ideas. I don't know how far I want to go into this. Maybe we'll just like talk about it today as like kind of a teaser for next week. But let's go into it. So I have this problem in that it's I collect all this data about schools. I collect data from different application types. I collect this prompt data, and I have 2,000 plus schools that I collected for the core of the product. so that when I talk about tracking schools, there's actually like a believable amount of US universities and institutions and colleges to consider. The problem is that you got to do things that don't really scale when you start up a startup. That's what the advice is out there. And this doesn't really scale. It's not going to scale in the long term. I know that, but I don't really have a lot of customers right now, so it doesn't matter at this point. But I would sort of like to prepare myself for some of that scaling issue. And also, some of this stuff is just boring. Like, if we look at, let's go over this page. If we look at this list of schools at the top, come on. It's like hundreds of schools here. And what I need to do with this is take this list of schools and make a foreign key connection to my actual school in the College Conductor database. So if I have a Pitzer College record, I need to be able to point my College Conductor school, and then let me give you something that you can actually even look at so that you know what the heck I'm talking about. So I have a school model. It's in my database that's like all the stuff that I care about, for displaying images, displaying IDs from various systems, tracking various stuff. This is like the core model of my database. And so things kind of circle around this, like prompt, like common apps. But the challenge is that making those connections, which is what the value is in College Conductor of having all of that information and reaching out to all of those different places, is super useful. But the actual process of doing the connecting is really, really tedious work and really monotonous. And because of that, I haven't actually done a whole lot of it. I've done some, but not enough. And so I want to do a couple of things. And those things include kind of gamifying it a little bit, just enough, nothing fancy, but just enough so that I have interest of knowing, what's your percentage completion on, like, how many schools do you have left to process for this stuff for now? And until that number is at 100% for a lot of these things, I'll have something to shoot for. So that's a simple one. The other thing is going through and clicking around different admin pages and clicking different buttons to link stuff together. It's going to be painful. Thankfully, Django has some great built-in admin tooling and can make some of that easy enough, but other parts are going to be tedious. To give you an example, I've got the prompt schools. I pull out all the school names. I'm going to have to find the matching school on that side. And the slowest way I could do this would be to go to my admin screen and go to the prompt schools and look through the list and look at the name of the school, and where it has a foreign key spot or a one-to-one field spot for a school, I could hit the little button that's next to it, which brings up a pop-up, and I could search for Pitzer, continuing on our Pitzer College example. I could search for Pitzer, and if I have Pitzer in my data, I could click it and it'll put it into the admin, and then I could hit save, and then I go to the next school. I mean, I'm kind of like lumbering over this to give you this idea of like, this is just horrible, because it will take a long time. And whoops, lost something there. There we go. So what's the alternative? I could also speed this up by giving myself a page that is same thing, but sort of customized as, here's Pitzer in my prompt school, but in advance of displaying that, also taking Pitzer College and splitting it up and doing the search for Pitzer automatically and showing all the schools that might match Pitzer. And since college is a word that's going to match virtually everything, just throw it away. So I'd get Pitzer as one example. But let's say I had something a little with more words in it, like maybe we can find a decent example. Here's a good one. SUNY Binghamton. So this is the State University of New York. This is the New York State Schools. And there's a bunch of these. So if I was going to go with that strategy of split the school name up into 3 different things and do searches on them, I could take this and I'd say, okay, university is a common word, throw that one out. But I could do a search for SUNY and I could do a search for Binghamton. Hopefully, one of those words will get me right to the results, and I could design a dashboard, an admin dashboard, where I click that one and some code will run in the background that will automatically make that connection for me. So that gives you an idea of a way that I can speed up this process of doing this administrative work. And it's still not going to be fun, but if it's really like something like, if I find the right school, if I am able to click it, and even in my view, maybe it says, okay, let me redirect you to the next one. I could just like click, and get through a whole list of schools a lot faster than working from the admin, bringing up a pop-up, doing a search, finding the school, etc., etc., etc. So I think that's where I want to go. I don't think that I want to commit to starting it tonight, but I wanted to give you all an idea of what's going on. I didn't know how long that previous chunk of stuff was going to take, but that's my thought. And we're going to do this like super low fidelity. Like this will be almost like intro level HTML design, because what I'm going to have is essentially a white page with some links, with some headings, standard HTML tags, and it's not going to be exciting to look at, but the idea that I want to convey and I want to teach is that you can get stuff done faster by spending a little time writing some tooling up front that will enable you to get through those long, arduous tasks that would have taken you many hours, and you get through them quickly. So I think that's maybe where I'll stop it this evening. So let's just kind of like wrap up. What do we do tonight? We finished off an integration that we've been working on for a variety of streams. That integration goes out and gets data from a service called Prompt, pulls in the list of schools, gets that all into the database, and will now, when this weekly task runs, it will send me an email. And that's great. That's where I want to be, so that I can start to do the actual background processing. Going forward, I want to make that stuff easier. So we're going to do this admin stuff in the future episodes, and really just work on something simple, but give me a good solid base to add more pages, because this is not going to be the last time that I have to do these sort of back-end processing tasks in order to make the data that's available to College Conductor that much richer. So I hope you were able to learn something out of that. I will make sure that this recording goes up on YouTube and is available for review, watching later. If you have any questions, I got some good questions from Juan Carlos Baco today. Thank you, Juan. And I really appreciate the feedback. I do want to always make this better. So if there are things about this stream that you didn't care for or think I could do better, please let me know. I'm MB Layman on Twitter, just like my Twitch handle. If you want to follow, subscribe, whatever, and catch when I'm streaming again, you can do that as well. I do plan to stream every Wednesday or so at about 9 p.m. Eastern time. And I also run a local meetup that meets on Wednesday nights. So next week I will be at a Python meetup instead of in front of my computer. So I'll pick up streaming again here in 2 weeks, which I guess would be, what is that date? The 16th? Man, I'm bad with calendar math. 16th. Yeah. Okay, cool. So if you thought this was useful, do me a favor and share it on Twitter or let others know in some way. If Twitter's not your thing, that's cool. Dropping frames. All right, cool. I need to figure out some better streaming stuff too to bring up the frame rate. So with that, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week or next 2 weeks. Take care.